My name is Brandon Ward, broadcast journalism student at Penn State Lehigh Valley. It is April 20th, 2016. We are in Center Valley, Pennsylvania. I'm with Colleen Hauser. So Colleen, can you please tell me where and when you were born?
I'm not going to tell you when. I was born in New Jersey, Plainfield, New Jersey, and grew up in South Plainfield. Lived in Union County for a number of years, and 3 years ago moved to Pennsylvania.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about your parents and their occupations?
Well, the occupations, were 60s occupations. My mother was a homemaker. My father worked for Lockheed Electronics that had contracts of many military aircraft. He was a veteran of World War II, as were his two other brothers also.
What branch was he in?
He was in the Army, and his brothers were in the Army Air Corps and the Seabees.
Can you tell me a little bit about where he served as well?
He served in North Africa during the Second World War for about 18 months to 2 years. And he was in Egypt and in Sicily, and of course then came home, stateside. His brother was killed in action during World War II.
Was his the CV brother?
It was the Army Air Corps. He was a pilot.
Okay. Can you tell, do you have any siblings, by the way?
A younger brother, a much younger brother that lives in another state, yes.
Did he have any affiliation with the military?
No.
What were you doing before you entered the service?
Before I entered the service, I graduated from school, and I was doing financial sales for a leading insurance company before I joined the National Guard.
Can you, obviously you just said that you served in the National Guard. Did you enlist or were you drafted into it?
Well, as a female, I enlisted in the National Guard during the Vietnam conflict. I wanted to be part of the military. I was not sure if I wanted to be a full-time soldier, but I enlisted in the Army National Guard and spent 10 years in the National Guard.
Can you please tell me why did you choose that specific branch over any of the other branches?
Well, a little bit of family loyalty. My father was in the Army. The facilities, the armory, and where they did their annual training, I was familiar with. So actually that's why I chose the Army National Guard. I had an opportunity some years down the road to transfer to the Army the Air Guard, but at that time, they promised me another promotion in the Guard, so I stayed where I was.
Is there any difference between the Army Air Guard and just the regular Army itself? Is there
between the Army National Guard and the Army and the Air Guard?
And the Air Guard, correct.
Well, the Air Guard is all the weekend duties are down at McGuire Air Force Base, and their duties mostly are just flying missions over the weekend, mostly to Greenland and back. Where in the Army National Guard, where I was sent for basic training and then advanced individual training. I was trained as a radio teletype operator, which probably doesn't exist anymore, but we did our weekends at a local armory and our annual training at different Army bases in the country.
Can you please tell me what happened when you departed for boot camp and during your early days of training?
Well, I went to basic training in Fort McClellan, Alabama, and since I enlisted and I wasn't drafted, I chose to go there. So basic training is basic training. You sort of, grit, your teeth and, just do it. I wasn't prepared for, say, some sexual harassment from the officers there, but the woman coming into the Guard units across the country was just new. They were just starting to let women in. So I did what I had to do, and of course I chose this and, went through, since it was only a short period of time.
How many weeks?
It was 6 weeks of basic training, and then at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and then advanced individual training at Fort Gordon, Georgia, which was about 9 weeks.
Can you tell me about any memories that you have of going through boot camp? Any fond memories? Any memories of that you've had?
Well, basic training, I said, is sort of like basic training. I don't know too many people that say they have really fond memories. You just do what you have to do and get through it. They trained us in, besides drilling and what have you, firing an M16, a grenade launcher, all the things that you need to know if you're going to war, digging fox holes and that sort of thing. But I have to say, it probably did, it sounds cliche, but it probably did mature me a whole lot.
Did you receive any specialized training while you were in boot camp as well, if so?
That comes after basic training. AIT, Advanced Individual Training, is, like I said, at Fort Gordon, and I was trained to be a radio teletype operator, which is, simply said, back in the day, were radios tuned to certain AM frequencies and a teletype machine, and we would encrypting messages back and forth, and that was radio teletype. It sounds simplified, but it really was more complicated.
So if somebody today was doing that in the Army, would that be similar to a cryptologic technician as well?
Yes.
Okay. How did you adapt to military life, including the physical regimen, the barracks, food, and the social life, from going from being a civilian to the military sector?
Well, again, like I said, since I enlisted and I wasn't a full-time soldier, I was going back to a guard unit, I think I adapted pretty well, as opposed to, say, some of my male counterparts that were actually drafted. Again, I went with an open mind because, again, I did it voluntarily in my own free will.
Would you have rather been full-time, or were you more than content with your status?
I contemplated over the years about going full-time, but I still thought that I was still, making, contributing something by being in the National Guard. So I did not go in full-time, no.
So you told me that your boot camp was in Alabama.
Correct.
Where else did you serve in your 10 years?
Since it was, like I said, stateside, it was all stateside Army bases, mostly annual training, a couple of weeks during the summer at Fort Drum, New York, down in AP Hill, Virginia, and sometimes special ones that we go to, like they would send us to Fort Gordon, but generally like in the eastern seaboard area, yes.
Were you able to travel to the West Coast at all?
Not on the Army's dollar.
So can you tell me about any of the fond memories that you had of spending time in Virginia or in New York, any friendships that you might have made?
Oh, I made friendships that have lasted to this day with NCOs, non-com, soldiers, and officers that, like I said, last to this day. And I was surrounded by a number of people in my unit that were coming from Vietnam that, say, for example, had a tour of duty for 4 years, had done 3, and were finishing out in the National Guard. And I also had a number of fellow soldiers with me that were in the National Guard in lieu of being drafted. Back in those days, it's kind of hard to think about now, but back in those days, people that were, like, their draft number was coming up would have to get on a waiting list to get into the National Guard.
How did you stay in touch with your family and friends back home when you were stationed? Well, actually, you said you were at home the majority of the time, so you didn't have any issues?
No, I wasn't gone for any long period of time that I'd have issues with that.
Okay.
I did after 10 years. I probably would have continued after 10 years in the Guard, but I wanted to start a family. I was married by that time. And sometimes I do think about, gee whiz, another 10 years.
Right.
But that's one of the reasons why I did leave, regretfully slow, because I wanted to spend time with my family and not be away.
It's very understandable. So what did you do for recreation or when you were off duty?
Recreation. Recreation, I would, besides getting together with people in my section or my unit, mostly if we had, like, for example, when we had 2 weeks active duty in the summer, we would come in from the field and have the middle weekend off. So we would just take trips together for Fort Drum, New York. We'd go to Canada, but we spent a lot of time together, or even just picnic, like, say, in a quarry that was nearby. But I mean, everything was always like pure camaraderie. We're always together.
Can you please tell me where you were when the Vietnam War ended?
In the National Guard. Do you want me to say exactly what I was looking at the TV at the time when it ended, or?
Sure.
That would lead to other thing I'd like to say about the Vietnam War in general, but I have two schools of thought on that. But jumping a little bit ahead, I have great allegiance to our country and very patriotic, and I probably felt that way all through the Vietnam War, and especially even on college campuses when other people were at that time protesting. They had put an ROTC unit on our college campus, and everybody was outraged. My feelings at that time were, during the Vietnam War, and even when I had joined the National Guard, was that, well, even though it seems after so many years futile, I always felt that, well, if we're committed there, and I'm thinking back to like the U.S. involvement in World War II in Korea, there must be a very good reason for being there. To answer your question, where I was observing that finally, after 10 years, the war was ended. We pulled the soldiers out, and about a month later, Saigon fell. And then it was the dawning of like the futility of it all. It was like 10 years of so many, over 55,000 American lives sacrificed, and what to be gained.
Seeing as this was, the Vietnam War was back in the 1960s and the 1970s, and female soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen were not allowed to be on the front lines, that has obviously changed in the year 2016, and females who are able-bodied and ready to serve on the front lines are able to do so with their male counterparts. What are your thoughts on that, and do you think that females should have been allowed to be on the front lines back in the 60s and 70s as well?
That's a good question, because at the time, the few females that were in my unit, along with me, and we were just a handful, me, 3 other women out of, say, 150 men, in order to be on the same level as them, we wish we could have been active. We could have been at the battlefront or what have you. The most we could ever anticipate is if we were activated, that we would be, on the perimeter running the communications. We wouldn't be, out in the line of fire. But to answer your question, yes, I think back then it should have been allowed to have women, fighting. The Israeli army has for decades had women, and we thought that the U.S. was certainly very behind in the thinking of not allowing women to fight.
So how were you received by your family and your community during that time? Obviously, there was a lot of people who didn't approve of the Vietnam War. How did your peers and your family react to you being in the Army National Guard and serving your country back then?
Most of them were pretty positive about it. I'd say the only negativity that I really had about, because they knew I would not be sent to Vietnam, was that the National Guard, about in the late 60s, especially in my area, in the New Jersey, New York area, had gotten a very bad reputation, probably I'd say erroneously so, but they were the ones that were called out during the '68 riots in Newark. And apparently, some people got a little trigger happy. And at the time, just a few years later when I joined, the National Guard was like, oh, were you some type of crazed gun-carrying type of person? But that faded away in time. And the reaction I had from people were very positive, definitely.
So obviously, 10 years is a huge chunk of anybody's life, especially in the military.
Right.
You were used to going to New York, going to Virginia. You spent time in Alabama in boot camp. You were all over the country. How did you readjust from being in the military back to civilian life? Very
easily, because it said it was like a 1 weekend commitment, per month and 2 weeks out of the summer. So there was the only readjustment was, coming back from 2 weeks out in the woods and be able to shower again. That was an adjustment, a happy adjustment, I must add.
Have you remained in contact with or reunited with your fellow veterans within the past few years?
The two units I belonged to in the 10 years' time, I was with the 250th Signal Battalion, and then later with the 112th Field Artillery, DeVarty. And we stay in touch. We have associations that are posted on Facebook where we have like reunions about once or twice a year. And there are one project we have coming up is a couple of Vietnam vets that I know that belong to my association and belong to the Lehigh Valley Vietnam Vets Association. We're going to gather together, and about 24 of us throughout the country. We're going in September to Vietnam to build a house for Habitat for Humanity.
That's excellent. What have you done since separating from the military, work-wise or just in general?
Work-wise, after 10 years of in the National Guard, I actually felt that since I liked contributing, I liked being of service, I liked trying to change, like being of service, like being patriotic, appreciate my contribution. My work sites turned from financial sales to going back and getting my degree, and became a teacher of children with individual disabilities. And I worked from that time until, I am still too, a teacher of special education in Jersey, with a couple of underprivileged areas that I worked in, and now I'm working in the Northampton County area.
Today they have the Montgomery GI Bill for veterans, or they have the post 9/11 GI Bill that they are allowed to take advantage of and use it for school. Were you able to take advantage of either of those in getting your college degree?
While I was in the Guard, yeah, I had gotten an opportunity to get credits at a lesser rate than the normal rate. Something you just said just jogged another memory of me when you said the bills, because that's another thing that I'm involved with since leaving the Guard, or since I moved to the Pennsylvania area. And the VVA, the Vietnam Vets Association, one of our goals is, besides feeding the homeless vets, and there's quite a few in the Lehigh Valley area, is to is to make sure that vets know what's available to them, whether it's they're ill or they're disabled, because a lot of them do not know. A lot of them do not know that in this modern day and age, it's just creeping up now, that some of them did not know they're entitled to benefits from Agent Orange. So you talk about things transcending decades. It's been proven now, we have vets in our group that their grandchildren have been affected by Agent Orange.
I had no idea. So I see here that medals or service awards that you earned while you were in, it says an Oak Cluster for your years of service. Can you describe to me what an Oak Cluster is?
That's for the years of service. It's, worn on the lapel. It's for the number of years that they're, in service. I was when I left the National Guard, or when my enlistment ended, after 10 years, I re-enlisted obviously a couple of times. I was a staff sergeant when I left the National Guard.
If you could go back today and change anything, would you have stayed in for the full 20 years?
Yes. Yes, I guess I would have. I would have. Well, I say that, I should qualify that, but then there have been 10 years of weekends and weeks away from my children, and since I had my children a little bit later in life, that was more important to me.
So what are some life lessons that you learned from your 10 years in the military?
Well, some of my life lessons. I would say, going back to, well, I learned certainly the word I'm looking for is maturity from the basic training, continuing a job, perseverance, definitely. Annual training certainly taught us perseverance, because during annual training we had to work like in a perimeter, like we were under fire, we were communicating, we were doing cryptology and what have you. So the life lessons was certainly to continue and just keep on going till the job gets done. The other life lessons are, I would say, my reaction to the Vietnam War after the Vietnam War ended. I feel like perhaps earlier on I should have been more active. I should have been more pro, getting ourselves out of Vietnam than we did. That's a life lesson I learned there too. But the life lessons I learned were, to me, I want to say the military is like a buddies club or a good old boys club, but I certainly have those friendships have lasted like forever, and it's sort of like, since I've been out for many, many years now with the National Guard and just gravitated to the Vietnam Vets Association, it was almost like from the first meeting that a friend has come home and that type of thing.
So what message would you like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview?
I would like to leave this thought, that it's okay to be patriotic, that I think our first allegiance should always be to our country. We live here, we work here, we were born here. Even if you weren't born here, you eventually become a citizen of the United States. I would always say that it doesn't hurt to be part of the military, even if it's like on a part-time basis, such as the reserves, because I am a committed patriot, and I always will be.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or that we should add to this interview as well?
No, I was going to talk about Vietnam, the Vietnam War, and the lives that were lost. But I think I already went over that when we were talking. And again, I was proud to be a member of the National Guard. I still am. We have, just in closing, another good thing that our VA does is that they belong to the Patriots, the Writing Patriots group, and that's not the exact name of it. But they are, if somebody in the Lehigh Valley, a vet, no matter of what war, passes away, they're there for a color guard for at the service or at the funeral. And much overlooked too, strange as may seem, only happens once every couple of months, but we hear of a soldier coming into the Lehigh Valley Airport. We gather there to greet them, and usually, sometimes we're the only people there to greet them. And I just think that's a wonderful thing.
Well, thank you very much, Colleen, for coming out today and sharing your story with us. And thank you very much for your many, many years of dedicated service to our country.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I'm Brandon Ward, Penn State Lehigh Valley.